Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Fortunately, the term mental health is now more widely accepted. About 20 years ago, 15 years ago, people would be uncomfortable talking about their mental health or even that topic in general. It's just a part of our health. But what about your brain health? Let's go a little bit deeper in all of that. She's a brain health expert and coach and the founder of the Brain Performance Center in Texas. And she is Leigh Richardson. And she's back with us. Leigh, welcome back. How you doing?
Thanks for having me back, Steve. I am doing great. It's a beautiful day in Dallas, and the sunshine does wonders for my brain.
I'm there with you. Send some of that over here to the New York area. It's kind of raw, a little rainy, 43 degrees, but we did the time change last weekend.
And we got through it, so that's something.
And it makes you feel good when you have light at the end of the day in terms of your mental health and maybe even your brain health. When we talk about brain health, how do we define that?
Well, to me, brain health, the brain is an organ. And we've touched on this in other conversations, just like the heart is or the skin is. And really, brain health and mental health, they overlap. So I think it is confusing to people. When I think about brain health, though, I think about my organs. Like, we're all living a lot longer. Steve, 65 is the new 45.
Agreed.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Agreed.
But at the same time, there's some bad news with that. The World Health Organization predicts that by 2030, half of the economic impact from disabilities will be brain related. There'll be 1 in 3 of older adults suffers from Alzheimer's and dementia. And those are things that, 1 out of 3, I don't like those odds. I'd rather be 1 out of 10, Now, but there's good news. The good news is there, and this is what I'd like for us to talk about today. There are things that each and every one of us can do to help our brain stay healthy. And, you got to work it. You absolutely got to work it. And I think what a lot of people that come to the Brain Performance Center come for, they're seeing a change in their executive function, how their brain, because your prefrontal cortex, that's where executive function is. The back of your brain is where you process it. And it's the strange thing is this is the last part of the brain that gets developed. And then, my gosh, it's the first place that you notice it's going. And, one of the first things that I think I see a difference in is how people process information. And all ages, people come to the Brain Performance Center and they'll say, Leigh, I have real focus issues. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Do you get distracted? Can you not stay on task? But the more that we'll talk about it, and the more after doing some analysis, I'll realize they're not processing. The brain gets information 2 ways. You see it, and it goes back to that little bony point in your brain, that's the occipital lobes. You hear it, and it goes into your temporal lobes. From there, it goes right above in the back of your head, parietal, and that's where you process it all. And if you can't process it, you can't focus on it. So, and that's a change that a lot of people will see, is it does get, as they age, it does get harder to process information. Particularly, we've got information coming at us. We may be on our phone and driving. We may have the radio on. Somebody may be honking their horn at us, and we're trying to figure out what do we pay attention to.
Can I jump in here in a couple of points?
Sure.
When you say process information, I think I heard it from you that we're not designed to multitask.
You did hear that from me.
And that was kind of a shock to me. And yes, as you get older, it gets a little bit harder when you've got all of this going around at the same time. And you do this, I got to do that, got to do this, got to do that, keeping notes and typing reminders and all of that. But it doesn't matter what age you are. I just want to confirm that multitasking, bad idea, not good for you.
And thank you so much for making that point, because it's amazing when you calm that brain down and when you get all the energy from the brain focused on one thing,
Mm,
it's amazing what you'll do so much a better job.
for sure.
And that's something that we all want. But I mean, there's people that take great pride. They'll come in here, Leigh, I can multitask. I can do 5 things at once. And I'm like, really? That's great. That's not good for your brain, but
Yeah.
I'm glad that you have that. And then the reaction I get to that is like, let's stop and think about that. And reactions is one thing that changes too as we age, because if it takes us longer to process it, and then we try to focus on it, and then we react to it. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when we have trouble processing and somebody's waiting and they're standing there and they're looking at us like, come on, give it to me.
Mm.
And it's very frustrating. It's it is for me when I get caught in that way, because I want to be right there with you and have an answer. So, while it's normal that it might take you a little longer to process, particularly if somebody says something, you go, you know what? I need to think about that. That's really thought worthy. That's normal.
It's okay. So many of us want to have the answer right away. Salespeople, the good ones, are taught that if you don't have the answer, it's wonderful to say, you know what? I'm not really sure about that. I'm going to check on that and get back to you. It's okay. The other thing, when you talk about multitasking, that person that says, yeah, I got 5 things at once. Good for you. How well are you doing all of those 5 tasks? Because been there, done that, even recently. I was going through some stress and a lot of things going on, and I would try to do all these things. And I realized, A, it wasn't fun because it just was not a good time trying to multitask. And B, I didn't feel that I put my full creativity and energy into each of those items, whereby if you just focus on one of them at a time, you feel that, yeah, it was well done. I thought of all the things that need to get done with it. Now I'm going to go to the next thing. I think a lot of us are afraid to admit that at any age, I'm getting older, I can't multitask. No, you could be 25. It doesn't mean you're good at it.
No, my philosophy is I'd rather touch it one time. I would rather focus on one thing, touch it one time,
Yeah.
leave it, and I've done, you know what, I'm happy with what I did. I put good energy out there.
Yep.
Touch it one time.
Another point I want to bring up real quick, and we talked about, you said, 65 is a new 25, and a lot of us are dealing with brain health issues. Bruce Willis, 67, dementia.
Yeah.
And a rare form of it. I think it's frontal temporal dementia, I think it's called.
Well, and he is such a good example, because I think one of the first things that was noticed on the television that I saw was the speech. He would have a hard time answering. I mean, he looks great. Physically, he looks just great, but he'd have a hard time processing and being able to answer those questions. And I was so proud of his family for sharing that, because some of us, we get in our head, well, it's just me. I've never been that bright. And we see someone like Bruce Willis, who's a man who's done everything, and it happens to him. So I think that's a great wake-up call for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I give him a lot of credit for stepping forward. And I saw last week the paparazzi were taking pictures of him and a couple of his buddies walking down the street. I just want to take the camera. But leave the guy alone, just have a little bit of peace, and you don't need to say, hey, how you feeling? It's okay. He's good. He's good. Let him live his life. He's given us a lot of joy in terms of his projects. And, now he's on to a different form of his life, a challenging one. But I just want to bring that up just to show that brain health, even those, with all the fame and fortune, it affects everybody.
I can't agree with you more. And what we all need to focus on is mental flexibility. We get so caught up in my way or the highway,
Mm.
and that's so rigid. And if you can just focus on that mental flexibility, being able to switch gears really quick, eventually, I've got one client that comes to mind. After 30 minutes showing the benefits of being able to switch gears more quickly, that person will do it. But, and it's because they don't have the mental flexibility. And, everything that goes on in your brain, what part of the brain? Right down the middle of your head, you've got a functioning neural pathway called the cingulate gyrus. And it takes the information from the back of the head where you process it and you bring it up to the front of the head. Well, if that loop is looping too much or not enough, it's harder. You're not getting the information transferred from back to front. So it's harder to switch gears.
Wow. How do you change that? Is there a way to, is it habit like an athlete, keep doing the same sport, whatever, you get better at it? Is there a way that we can push our brains to transfer a little bit faster?
Absolutely. And I think one of the first things that I really encourage people to do is stop and it's not that hard to get objective data. And don't ask your wife or your husband or your children. Get some objective data that really shows you how your brain is performing. And that gives you, because sometimes we don't recognize what our strengths. I have found myself worrying about something and found, had feedback. That's the thing that you knocked them out of the park on. That was your strength. And so objective data will help you understand what your strength and your weaknesses are in the brain. And once you understand what those are, then you can start to create self-regulation, both on a cognitive level and on an emotional level. And they're hard, emotions, and we get emotional. Somebody says something and it just upsets us. And it impacts what we say back. We don't stop, pause, think about a logical response. We stop and we blow right back at it. So when we think about, and I always tell people, when you think about what makes a healthy body, good sleep, good food, taking care of yourself, those are the things that make a healthy brain. And sleep, we just went through daylight savings time, and there are other things that impact our sleep, but sleep is the infrastructure that the brain runs off of all day long. The brain has 100 billion neurons, and clicking away, those neurons and dendrites are wiring and firing, and that takes a lot of energy. And the only chance that the brain has to rejuvenate itself is when you're asleep. And a sleep schedule, that's the number one cure. And I don't usually use the cure word, but the number one cure for insomnia is cognitive behavioral therapy, which I am a cognitive behavioral therapist. And that is in helping you understand what your sleep schedule needs to be. And usually, Steve, have you ever laid down to go to sleep and all of a sudden you start thinking about this negative thought comes into your head?
Oh yeah. I'm not alone. Friends do the same exact thing. I have one who, she's actually got me on the same sleep schedule. I don't know what happened, even just talking to her, because there are some mornings where I wake up and I'm like, I need another half hour. And then that's what she's been doing. But myself, her, others, yeah, the brain, you want to go to sleep and it's just like going around. And it's mostly negative, those thoughts.
Well, it usually is. And you've got to learn how to identify those thoughts, because once you can, and we've talked about this before, those little ants, those automatic negative thoughts, they go through your head so fast, so furious, you don't even know they were there. It's just all of a sudden you're thinking about, wow, this morning I really messed that up. But then it goes through and you're just can't sleep. You're just replaying your day and you don't know why.
Yeah.
So one of the best ways to catch those ants is to learn how to identify what those negative thoughts are. And I don't wish them on anybody, but we all have them. We all do.
Well, we're wired that way primitively to ward off danger. So we always gravitate toward that. And as kids, when we were growing up, you could be a toddler. You finally are walking, you come up to the kitchen table, you grab the salt shaker, and mom or dad says, no, don't put that down. So negativity it's in our DNA, unfortunately.
It is. And you know what's happened in our life in the last 3 years, what we went through with the pandemic?
Sure.
And that was global. And the World Health Organization predicts that we haven't seen the full ramifications on mental health from the pandemic, that around 2029 is when it'll all start to play out. That's 6 years from now.
Wow.
And yeah. And the more I read, and as you know, I'm working on a dissertation for a PhD, so I'm always reading something. But the more I read and I read those facts, the more I realize we've got to be aware of brain health. We have, because, the pandemic made us all so much more insular. We turned into ourselves. We had to. We couldn't go out. We couldn't see our older families. Kids couldn't go to school. People didn't go to work. Couldn't go to church. So we turned into ourselves. But what we've got to remember is we've got to have insight into other people's inner thinking, their inner world. What do they like? What do they dislike? What do they value? What do they need? What do they want? And, if you can start to, I call that positive psychology, but everybody that we deal with on a regular basis, we really should have some insight into their inner world and know, what do they need? What do they want? And I think during the pandemic, we got include me in this statement. I got so caught up in myself and how I was dealing with it. My office was shut for 6 weeks. And, that I turned more inward. And that's something we've all done.
Leigh, I want to ask you, you said that we're not going to see the full ramifications of the pandemic for another 6 years in terms of brain health. Why does it take so long, and what can we potentially expect in about 6 years from now?
Well, so let me answer the first one first. Why does it take so long? On the average, people that suffer from a mental health illness will suffer for 10 years before they'll get help. And that's because of the stigma associated with it. And we've touched on that, but people are afraid, and they're afraid to say, I have a mental health problem. And it is okay to not be okay. And that's what prompted me to write the book.
I love that title.
Turn your brain on to get your game on.
Yeah.
And it is okay to not be okay. So I think that's one reason. Now, what's going to happen in 2029, what's already happening, is we're seeing suicide rates go up. We're seeing anxiety and depression go up.
Oh, yeah.
And, I don't think that it's just going to all hit in 2029. I think that it's going to gradually continue to build. And as we do that, we've got a response. Society has a responsibility. Organizations, employers, the world of academia, to recognize that mental health problems are the same as physical health problems.
Well, look at what's going on. I think we had spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, but if you Google mental health, there is a crisis in our country. CDC says so. And teenage girls, the biggest impacted by all of this, probably what you're saying is coming from COVID, where the thought of even suicide among teenage girls is pretty much 50% of them have thought about that at one point.
Well, and social media, I think, plays into that, because when we were trapped
Yeah,
We had no way to reach out. We had no way to connect.
exactly.
And so we did it through social media, and that social media is a comparison. So you have a winner
Yes.
and a
Yes.
loser.
Yeah. And there it is, especially, and teenage boys, not so much affected. And just what you're saying, because of social media, girls spend so much more time, do comparisons of themselves to others. It takes away their confidence and so much more, and they feel isolated at the same time. So yeah, which I, I think you're onto something pretty major here, and we're just at the beginning stages of recognizing what's going on.
You know, and what has surprised me, Steve, is once you start having conversations about, so how much time do you spend on social media, and where do you spend that time,
Right.
and what do you get out of that time? And you know, the more conversations you have, the more people are pretty quick to realize, you know, I just wasted an hour on social media.
Oh yeah. It's so, and I'll be honest with you, I don't so much, but I got sucked in recently of just laying on the couch and start scrolling videos on TikTok, and like, what am I, an hour just went by. What did I just do? it's it's relaxing at one point, but it's a lot of times not doing the best for this up here when you spend that
It
time.
is absolutely not doing the best for the brain.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way that we use social media has changed. And you brought up TikTok, and it made me think of, and it's not just TikTok, it's
Sure.
every site,
Absolutely.
but they're starting to use that more as a search engine. They'll go in, and when you said mental health has been hashtagged in TikTok 67 million times. And they'll go in and they'll say, and they're even, I have a client, she's seeing a coach, she's seeing a counselor, me, but she'll wake up late at night, and something will start, you know, that question will start playing in her head. What does she do? She picks up the phone, and she'll go to TikTok or anywhere else looking for answers,
Yeah.
because that's such a relatable audience. You know, when I say, hey, go to Harvard Health, go to the Mayo Clinic, they're like,
No. No.
no.
It's interesting how it's also perceived to be that's your place for information. Even years ago, before social media was so big, people would listen to the entertainment report on the radio or TV, and they would say, "Yeah, that's how I got the news." But that
Yeah.
it's really not. And same thing now. It's the same with social media. That's where people are getting their information, news, whatever, however you want to phrase it, and it's just regular people posting stuff.
Well, and I think it slows down our decision making process, because on social media, you don't have to make decisions. You're just in a receiving mode. You're
Right.
watching,
Yep.
you're reading. So then when you go out to a restaurant and you pick up a menu, what do I want to eat? And maybe somebody will say, oh, I'm having the veggie burger. Oh, that sounds good. You know, but it changes the way that our whole brain works.
Mm,
There's no doubt about that.
wow. We don't think about that stuff. We don't.
No, we don't. And we need to.
Yeah.
We absolutely need to, because it affects problem solving,
Sure.
you know. And what I've seen with a lot of clients as they age, particularly business people, they'll come in and we'll be talking about, you know, they'll be doing some executive function coaching. And so they're trying to solve a problem, and listening is a great skill. But you listen and you say, you know, can I ask you a question? And of course, well, you said this, and then you said this, and you said this was the most important. Have you identified the right problem? And the look is kind of like, I don't know. So, you know, and that's how your brain works. Are you able to put things, sequence that information, prioritize? Because when I said, well, you said this was the most important thing. Oh, yeah, it is. So is that the right problem?
Wow. I would love to keep talking. We're out of time.
Well,
there's so much here that needs to be discussed. And first and foremost, talking about social media, it's like we sound like two old people. If you're, let's say you're younger. Oh, they don't like social media. They don't get it. No, we are getting it. And unfortunately, others don't. How it can be. It's a blessing. There's a lot of great involved in it. But
and I do like social media.
Sure.
I have a Facebook. I have an Instagram, Brain Performance Center. I have a LinkedIn, Leigh Richardson. I do like it. But it's with balance.
Right.
It's like everything else. One word, balance.
Yeah.
I prefer balance to moderation.
I like that too, because your life needs to get balanced if you're going to do well in life. And hey, social media is great. So is chocolate. Don't overdo the chocolate. It could be a problem. The website, is it brainperformancecenter.com?
It is the brainperformancecenter.com.
That's why I'm checking. Okay. And if somebody is wondering about their brain health, you can work remotely in many regards, right?
Absolutely. We can do a very brief neuropsychological evaluation that looks at cognitive and emotional, and that's objective data. And it's very well documented and validated. But that's a good place to start and just say, where am I? Where do I need to work to improve? Because if you need to work to improve on focus, then we would engage the brain differently than we would if it were memory. So
yeah,
there's all kinds of things.
Lots to consider. Even looking at that, when it comes to memory and focus, and even just the performance of your body and your health, it all got to start here. So start at thebrainperformancecenter.com. Leigh, a pleasure talking with you. Learned so much. I got to say, your stuff. You really, really do. And it goes deep. And I appreciate that. And I know there'll be other times we'll get together and talk again.
Well, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.